Boom! We are live, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to the Nolan Hawkeye Anthony YouTube channel. And I thank all of you for being here, wherever you may be. And of course, however you may be listening. I'm going to be continuing on my positional preview for the Iowa Hawkeyes regarding the upcoming 2023-24 football season. And I will, of course, be looking at the wide receivers next. Right off the bat, as we get straight into this, it is very interesting how the Iowa Hawkeyes approached the transfer portal and how quickly it changed from what we saw in years past. They were very aggressive. They landed two pretty good targets in the transfer portal. I believe they were after a few more that they missed on. Of course, landing Caleb Johnson and Seth Anderson. Now, on the flip side, they pretty much had no choice. Iowa had to land some targets, or else the cupboard was going to be essentially bare with a few scholarship guys, very young players, underclassmen, and some walk-ons. So they really had no choice after losing Keegan Johnson and Arlen Bruce. Now, let's examine the impact of losing Keegan Johnson and Arlen Bruce. I really believed that Keegan Johnson had the potential to become the best wide receiver that we had seen come out of Iowa in a long time. And really, when you're gauging that in the Kirk Ferentz era, you'd probably have to go with Amir Smith-Marset and Brandon Smith. They're probably up there. Matt Vandenberg was pretty good. Riley McCarron, some other slot receivers, Cavante Martin-Manley, of course. But it's definitely not a long list, obviously, of just super, super talented guys. But I thought Keegan Johnson could be, at the very least, an ISM, Amir Smith-Marset, if not more. And it looked like he was well on his way to that trajectory. Then he got injured, battled through his injury. When he got back, the Iowa offense just was not the same. It was very lethargic, and he decided to leave. I think that it definitely was a pretty big loss considering the resources that Iowa had put into landing him. Keegan Johnson, up until Iowa landing Caleb Brown, was probably the highest rated wide receiver Iowa had landed since, straight out of high school at the very least, since, I'm trying to think back. Iowa got Oliver Martin, who was a U.S. Army All-American. It's funny, when Caleb Johnson, I just thought about this, when Caleb Johnson chose the Iowa Hawkeyes, a lot of the articles said that he was by far the highest ranked receiver that Iowa had landed transfer portal or straight out of high school in a long time. But of course, Oliver Martin was a top 100 player and the number one player in the state. From Iowa City, chose Michigan, U.S. Army All-American. And there actually was, I would argue that there was actually more buzz around Oliver Martin because of his kind of late rise and emergence and multi-sport athlete profile than Caleb Martin. Now, the only reason why I'm more familiar with Oliver Martin is because he lived in the state of Iowa and heavily considered the Hawkeye. So it's certainly possible that Caleb Martin was had just as big of a profile as Oliver Martin. But point is that Iowa has landed some talent either in the transfer portal or at a high school. And I wanted to start with that before I go back to what Iowa lost and what they gained. A lot of Iowa fans, and I think some football analysts, have this idea that Iowa just does not land high-level wide receiver talent. But I'm here to tell you guys that's just simply not true. And if you look in the past 5 years, which I will show you guys, Iowa has landed guys with pretty strong regional offers if not national offers as well, each year. I mean, we're talking guys that are high 3-star, low 4-star guys that Iowa has landed. Just to name a few, right off the top of my head, Iowa has landed Brody Brecht, who had a ton of regional offers, high 3-star wide receiver, who was a multi-sport athlete, tons of buzz. It was a massive recruiting win for the Iowa Hawkeyes. Keegan Johnson, 4-star across the board, was probably the highest rated receiver Iowa has landed out of high school in a long time. Arland Bruce ended up being a 4-star by one or two recruiting services. At the very least, he was a high 3-star recruit coming out of high school. But at the same time, a lot of the services didn't see him purely as a wide receiver. They saw him as an athlete as he transferred from his school in Oklahoma, or no, it was Kansas, to Ankeny during the pandemic. So also, on top of that, we have Jacob Bostic, high 3-star. He had multiple regional offers. He's still on the Iowa Hawkeye roster. Deontay Vines had some decent offers. I mean, you just go down the list, and those are some pretty nice gets for the Iowa Hawkeyes that they had to battle Big 10 schools and Big 12 schools to land their services. So when I say regional offers, I'm talking about pretty much Midwest. So I will show you guys some of the recruiting profiles of some of the guys that Iowa has landed at the wide receiver position, so you guys know that I'm not just feeding you guys some smoke here when I say that Iowa has landed some pretty good wide receiver talent, at the very least, some talent to work with. Now, going back to what Iowa lost, of course, they lost Keegan Johnson, and they also lost Arland Bruce. Arland Bruce had a better second season than Keegan Johnson did. I would say Keegan Johnson had a better first year than Arland Bruce did. And Arland Bruce definitely seemed to have a future with the Iowa Hawkeyes. Had he stayed with the Iowa Hawkeyes, he would almost more than certainly be one of the starting wide receivers for the Iowa Hawkeyes this upcoming season. And had he just stayed, potentially Iowa doesn't land Caleb Brown or Seth Anderson. Potentially they can only land one of those guys. Maybe they still land both those guys. Iowa's wide receiver room would have been phenomenal. And like I said, he still would have been a starter. He would have seen some good snaps, but ultimately enough was enough. He had spent enough time in his 2 years with the Iowa Hawkeyes and decided to leave, going to Oklahoma State. Keegan Johnson landed at Kansas State. So what does Iowa have returning? Let's go ahead and take a look at that really quickly. As I mentioned, they landed Caleb Brown, which was a massive get out of the transfer portal. And I did a video on that already. This was not an Oliver Martin situation where he had spent a ton of time at Ohio State like Oliver Martin did at Michigan and just didn't see the field and then decided to go to Iowa because, of course, Iowa, is not as good as the high tier Michigan football team, and may as well just try his hand with the Iowa Hawkeyes because he'll definitely be able to get snaps there. That was not the case here. Caleb Johnson, a lot of insiders with Ohio State liked him a lot. He saw the field a little bit last year as a true freshman, and it was thought that he was definitely going to be a major contributor for the Ohio State Buckeyes this upcoming season. The Iowa Hawkeyes also landed Seth Anderson, which I think is a very underrated get for the Iowa Hawkeyes. I love the experience that he already has at the Division I level, as he played at Charleston Southern, I believe it is. And was the offensive MVP in year one. Folks, that's a big deal, okay? It may not be the Big Ten, but being the offensive player of the year in any conference, it's a big deal. And it's definitely worth mentioning. So I love his experience. And for me personally, as a fan and as a former Division I athlete myself, I always err on the side of being optimistic when it comes to players who have experience at the collegiate level, because you know that they can get it done at that level. Whereas a Caleb Brown or an athlete that comes from a school, but they didn't see a ton of action, there's still a level of uncertainty there. So who else are we working with? We have Nico Reganey, aka Nico Ragiani, at the start. He's been at Iowa for 6 years now. It's incredible how long. Guys, he was a wide receiver when Iowa beat USC with Nate Stanley as their quarterback. Okay. And I'm actually very excited for his opportunity this upcoming year, because I've always liked Nico Reganey's game. I think he's more athletic than people give him credit for. I think he has good hands. He has good route running ability. I don't know if he has any plans for the NFL after this. Listening to some of his comments, perhaps he doesn't. He's mentioned wanting to coach after college, but I am looking forward to seeing what type of season he can have with a decent quarterback that can get him the ball and has the capability of running and keeping the defense honest. And like I said, very excited to see what Nico Reganey is able to do with a quarterback like that. We have Deontay Vines. All the reports have been very positive about him. I'm very excited as well about his potential with the Iowa Hawkeyes. He's very athletic, very fast. And the reason you should be excited about Deontay Vines and optimistic is this will be the first season that Deontay Vines has been healthy. That's been the biggest thing that has plagued his career, is not being able to stay healthy, which is a concern. I mean, what do GMs and scouts always say? That one of the top skill sets a player can have is being available, being not being injured. That is a major asset to have, and it still is a concern for Deontay Vine. But so far so good, and I think that is certainly a reason that you could be optimistic. But it's also something to keep an eye on moving forward. Behind him, Alex Wick. Behind Nico Reganey, at least on the depth chart for now, Reese Osgood, and then Jacob Bostic back there. Some of the recruits that Iowa took in the running back preview video I mentioned Terrell Washington Jr. I do believe that he is coming to Iowa as a running back. He's coming to Iowa kind of as a Tyler Goodson, kind of as an Arlen Bruce, more towards Tyler Goodson, I would say, than Arlen Bruce, in that he's a Swiss Army knife. He can play wide receiver, he can play slot, and he can be a running back. So I do want to just mention his name slightly when it comes to the wide receiver position, because I don't think it is set in stone that he is going to be a running back for the Iowa Hawkeyes. What I do think, regardless, is that this guy, there's a reason why Purdue recruited him. We're talking Jeff Brom here. Jeff Brom knows offensive talent. I think that he is going to make an impact for the Iowa Hawkeyes in year one, whether it's purely at running back or purely at wide receiver, slot receiver, or a little bit of both. I think we're going to see some impact from him. Iowa landed Alex Mata. I like his upside tremendously. He was graded as a 4-star. Again, this is my point, guys. Alex Mata, a lot of fans think that Iowa doesn't land 4-star wide receivers. Alex Mata was a 4-star, considered a 4-star recruit by On3 recruiting services. And by every other recruiting service, a high 3-star athlete. I mean, by rivals, he was 1 point away from being a 4-star recruit. So my expectation for Alex Mata, I think it's certainly possible that he sees the field in, whether it's special teams, whether it is as kick and kickoff or punt returner. I'd be surprised if he is with that, just because Iowa does have other talent on the roster. It's not imperative for him to see action at either one of those positions in year one. He's very fast. So if he sees the field, I see it in one of two ways. Either one, in special teams duty, like not being a kick returner or a punt returner, but just normal special teams duty, blocking, and things like that. It's always good to have athletes on the field with that. Or number two, as a guy that can stretch the defense for the Iowa Hawkeyes a few plays a game. But again, there you guys can see it that I'm not just blowing smoke about Iowa having 4-star wide receivers on their roster. Look at that, guys, right there. I mean, and even if you don't see him purely as a 4-star receiver, I mean, his recruiting profile is still pretty strong. I mean, he has a grade of an 88.08. That's still very, very good. The other guys, there's Terrell Washington Jr. I mentioned him. The other guy is Dayton Howard. I am very optimistic about Dayton Howard for the Iowa Hawkeyes long term, but as far as his year one possibility, I think that he has a better chance of seeing the field in year one than Alex Mata does, only because Iowa does not have a pure X wide receiver. Okay. And Dayton Howard is a legitimate 6'5", 6'6" wide receiver. Okay. And all of the information we heard about him when Iowa landed him is that everybody was stunned that he was kept under the radar for as long as he was. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, the guy is 6'5", 195 pounds. Those guys at the high school level don't grow on trees. So I think he has a better chance of seeing the field in year one because Iowa does have a desperate need of a true red zone threat, an X receiver that can go up and get a few 50-50 balls, at least, 10 to 15 plays a game. The red zone, I'm not necessarily as concerned about, as Iowa has some legitimate red zone threats at the tight end position, but you can still throw Dayton Howard out there just to get his feet wet. So I would not be surprised in the least if Dayton Howard burns his red shirt this year. I don't think it's likely, just like I don't think it's likely that Alex Mata does, but it's definitely possible, and you shouldn't be surprised if it happens, even more so with him because Iowa does not have a pure X wide receiver. But I think Iowa is far more likely to use Jacob Bostic than they are to use one of these true freshman wide receivers. The other freshman wide receiver Iowa brought in is Jarriett Bowie out of the state of Florida. And again, a pretty solid recruiting profile, 5.6, 75, 86, 80. Let's see here. 85 by On3. He had some pretty good offers. I'm going to pull up his profile as a whole. He's 6'2", 6'3", pretty good size. See if oh, shoot. It's not going to. Here we go. I mean, good offers, guys. This is what I'm talking about Iowa defeating legitimate Power 5 schools for the services of certain wide receivers. West Virginia, Iowa State, Boston College. Guys, those are legitimate Power 5 schools. So that's going to be it for the freshman. Jarriett Bowie, I don't think he'll see the field in year one, but it's not because I don't think he has a future for the Iowa Hawkeyes. He definitely does. All three guys in this class have a great future with the Iowa Hawkeyes. And I think that this may have low-key been one of the better wide receiver classes as a whole Iowa has brought in the past 10 years. I mean, it's pretty solid, the three guys that they were able to land with solid offers. I just want to really quickly go back to 2022, just to emphasize my point about Iowa landing guys with legitimate talent at the wide receiver position. Here's Jacob Bostic. He had a grade of an 88 by On3, okay, 87 by 247 Sports, 77 by ESPN, and a 5.7 by Rivals, okay? And it may have even been higher if it wasn't for the pandemic. He had offers from Illinois, Louisville. I think he had an offer from Wisconsin as well. Let's see. Navy, pretty good offer. Army, pretty good offer. So he had some legit, and the reason why his offer sheet is not as good as some is because he committed fairly early to the Iowa Hawkeyes, fairly early on in the process. But I think that this is Iowa. I think it's more likely that we see Jacob Bostic playing the Z and the X wide receiver for the Iowa Hawkeyes this upcoming year predominantly. It doesn't mean that we can't see Dayton Howard or Jarriett Bowie at playing the X, although I think Jarriett Bowie, much like Jacob Bostic, is more a Z. I think Jacob Bostic can play both a little bit more than Jarriett Bowie can. So, we'll see. We'll see. But again, that's why I think Dayton Howard definitely has a possibility, because he is the only wide receiver on the Hawkeye roster that is a legitimate 6'5", 6'4" or above. And that really, when you're talking about the X position, you're looking for a wide receiver that moves the chains and is a pretty solid route runner. You're not necessarily looking for them to take the top off the defense, but you're looking for them to be a possession wide receiver, to be able to move the chains and win one-on-one in short yardage situations, 1 to I'd say 10, between 10 and 15 yards. So that is pretty much it, guys. That is the wide receiver position. There's not really a ton of other guys on the roster. Really quickly, we can take a look at Keegan Johnson and was there any other wide receivers that Iowa landed in this class? Let's see. They had Jacob Bostic, Cale Vanderbush was a tight end. Yeah, so it was just Jacob Bostic. But really quickly, before we wrap this up, I do want to show you guys what Keegan Johnson was looking at here, what he was looking like here. I mean, he was definitely one of, look at this, guys. On 3 had him graded as a 92, okay? A legitimate 4-star wide receiver. 247 Sports had him as a 90. His composite ranking was a 90, or was 4-star. He was a 4-star composite wide receiver. ESPN 78. Rivals 5.8. Arland Bruce did not have a grade by On 3, which is kind of interesting. He was a 4-star by 247 Sports, a 4-star by Rivals, and a 79 high 3-star by ESPN. Okay. So don't fall victim to the whole narrative because of Iowa sucking at offense or not being as good as they can be offensively because they don't have a ton of wide receiver talent, that they don't have a ton of athleticism at the wide receiver position. It's just not true. And not only is it not true because of what I've shown you guys when it comes to the recruiting profiles of the wide receivers, but anytime you see the testing numbers, not only of the wide receivers, but any Iowa player at the pro day, they're some of the best testers at their position in the entire draft. And multiple years in a row now, we've seen Iowa wide receivers test very good either at the pro day or at the combine. Emir Smith-Marset tested well. Brandon Smith tested well. Riley McCarron ran a 4.3, I believe. There was one wide receiver, slot receiver, that ran a 4.340. It was insane. Maybe it was Nick Easley. So just don't fall prey to that, because in the end, you need to be able to truly evaluate the Iowa offense. And I don't want you guys to bail out Brian Ferentz and the lack of offensive production on, well, they don't have any athletes. They don't have any wide receiver threats. It's just not true. To wrap this up, guys, I'm going to pull up Caleb Brown's recruiting profile and show you guys his, and just give you guys my expectations for the position. I think the starting receivers for the Iowa Hawkeyes are definitely going to be Nico Ragaini, aka Nico Raggiani, aka Nico Ragaini, and Deontay. Man, there's some of you guys who love when I say that. It's really a phenomenal last name for Nico. Nico Ragaini and Deontay Vines are going to be the starters until or unless other players on the roster are so talented to where they take the starting position from them. Okay, so you guys should fully expect Deontay Vines and especially Nico Reganey to be the starting receiver for the Iowa Hawkeyes. Outside of that, I fully expect Caleb Brown to contribute to the Iowa Hawkeyes this year. He's too talented to not see the field, and we already see him when it comes to the Iowa Hawkeye camp highlights, working with the twos, working with the ones. His transfer rating was a 90. I don't know if it has his transfer rating. By and large, though, his transfer rating was a seen as a 4-star. Okay. So yeah, 4-star. They have him as a 90 in the transfer portal. Excuse me. Here, let's go back to that. Just want to see something real quick. Wow, Zach Brand transferred. UNI, huh? So, and behind him, I fully expect Caleb Brown to have an impact for the Iowa Hawkeyes this year. I fully expect Seth Anderson to see the field this year. This is the one position that I just don't feel super confident prognosticating, because it just depends on a ton of factors and there's a ton of unknowns. Okay. I would not be surprised if Nico Reganey ends up being, or Deontay Vines ends up being, the leading receiver. I also would not be surprised if it's Caleb Brown or Seth Anderson. I really wouldn't. If I had to guess, I would say it'll be Deontay Vines will end up being the leading receiver for the Iowa Hawkeyes this year, with Nico Reganey closely behind him. And I always tell you guys, what would a successful receiving season be like for the Iowa Hawkeyes? Well, simple. It would be the top 2 receivers for the Iowa Hawkeyes having between 700 and 900 yards receiving. I don't think any Iowa player will have 1,000 yards receiving this year. I'd be very surprised if that happened. But if Iowa can have 2 guys with 700 to 900 receiving yards, and the peripheral guys, the second and third string guys, the other contributors, the others having 300 to 500 yards, multiple guys having 2 to 3 guys having 300 to 500 yard seasons, that would be a successful season. That would mean Iowa was able to pass the ball somewhat decently. Okay. Definitely better than what we have seen in the past 2 years. This was his grade coming out of high school, 93 by On3. They were the least high on him, 95, 84, and 5.9. Very talented. Okay. Oliver Martin was somewhere around there on the recruiting cycles as well. So, and as far as touchdown passes, I would say because oftentimes that one's even a tough one as well, because oftentimes a receiver who is really good at getting yards is not always good at being a red zone threat. So I'll just put it to you guys this way. If the Iowa Hawkeyes can have their top 2 guys have anywhere from 5 to 8 touchdowns apiece, that will be really successful. That will definitely mean that Iowa had a good offensive year, not just receiving, not just passing the ball, but the offense. If multiple wide receivers, if the top 2 guys can have 5 to 8 touchdown receptions, that means that Iowa as a whole likely had a good offensive season. And then behind them, if 2 guys can have, 3 to 5 touchdown catches apiece, that would be good. So that'll pretty much do it, guys. That is the preview of the wide receiver position. The 4 main guys that I see taking the field are definitely Deontay Vines, Nico Reganey, Caleb Brown, and Seth Anderson. I think Jacob Bostic will be the 5th guy, and I think it's possible, depending on how they do in camp and how developed they are and how in need Iowa is, of an X receiver. I think it is possible that Iowa, puts Dayton Howard out there or a Jarriett Bowie out there. But quite frankly, I think it's far more likely that Iowa just rolls with their walk-ons. They feel just fine with their walk-ons. Now, their walk-ons are more slot guys than full-blown Alex Wick is about 6'1", than full-blown X receivers. So here we go. Here is the roster. Deontay Vines, 6 foot tall. Caleb Brown, 5'10". Seth Anderson, 6 foot. Jacob Bostic, 6'2". They do have Terrell Washington Jr. listed as a running back for now, so that is definitely telling there. As I knew, I already knew that, guys. I told you guys he was coming in as a running back. Reese Osgood, 5'11". He saw the field a little bit last year. Alex Mata, 6 foot. Jack Johnson, 6 foot. Graham Friedrichsen, 6'1". He might see the field a little bit too. I definitely liked him coming out of high school as a walk-on for the Hawkeyes. Alex Eichmann is 6'2". Alex Wick, 6'1", as I said. Dayton Howard, 6'4". Caden Wetschgen, 5'10". Oh, I cannot believe I almost forgot about Caden Wetschgen. I cannot believe. Now, I don't think it's for sure that he will see the field as a wide receiver a ton, but I do think we will definitely see him on special teams. But the one thing I would add is that Caleb Wetschgen will be in a rotation for the Iowa Hawkeyes. But really, to be quite frank, it doesn't change my top 5. I still think the top 5, regardless of Caden Wetschgen, I still think the top 5 is going to be Deontay Vines, not in any particular order. Deontay Vines, Nico Reganey, Caleb Brown, Seth Anderson, and Jacob Bostic. That's who I think will be the top 5 for the Iowa Hawkeyes. Aiden Price, 5'11". By the way, just to do this preview as solid as I can, Caden Wetschgen is a transfer from Iowa Western Community College. He is an excellent return man. He has excellent speed. He's definitely more in the mold of a slot receiver. And again, the potential is there. He is talented. But I just think that Iowa has 5 more guys right now, right as I'm recording this, that I see getting snaps ahead of him. So it's just that simple. Aiden McDermott, 6'1". Judah Mallett, 5'11". He was a really good walk-on get that the Iowa Hawkeyes got this past year. That's pretty much it, guys, at the wide receiver position. So anyways, guys, that's going to do it for me. That is it for the wide receiver position. It's by far probably the most intriguing position for me as an Iowa Hawkeye fan for this upcoming season. I'm very interested to see, as I said, what Nico can do with a decent quarterback in Cade McNamara. Deontay Vines, we saw a little bit from last year. It's going to be good to see him for a full year, assuming he can stay healthy, knock on wood. Caleb Brown, talent is all there. Seth Anderson, very talented. So a lot of unknowns, but definitely a lot to be excited about and look forward to when the Iowa Hawkeye season comes around. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Help your boy get to 2,000 subs. I'll put the Cash App and PayPal link in the description if you guys want to donate to the channel. Thank you to all of you who have donated to the channel thus far. It is greatly appreciated. Anytime somebody donates, I as long as they're okay with it. I'd like to give them a shout out because, I think it's very important to be in the YouTube space, to be a gracious and very thankful individual, because there are multiple channels out there that you guys can watch. So anytime I can do that shout out, I absolutely will. And last but not least, DVAP, don't be a pussy willow and facts our feelings, because your feelings just don't matter. Love you guys. See you guys next time. Go Hawks. Bye-bye.